Hi, hello everybody, and yeah, welcome to this super awesome and special edition of the ngBucharest meetup. We're here at the UiPath headquarters, and yeah, we'll have two awesome speakers today with us talking about super awesome things. There's around 20-30 people in the room as well participating. So yeah, just a really quick intro, as I usually do, but I just have to find the button to share my screen. There we go, Inception. Yeah, just really quick, some community announcements that we have. So yeah, we're the ngBucharest meetup. This is who we are. On social, follow us around. We post about events and awesome stuff that happens on in the Angular ecosystem. Yeah, as I said, special thanks again to the our guests or our hosts for today's event, UiPath. We have two awesome speakers for today. So Tracy, I'll let them talk about themselves more. But these are one of my favorite people in the JavaScript community. Both of them are RxJS core team members, which will be the topic of this event as well. But they also have a lot of other things going on inside the community. For example, Tracy, is the leader of the hashtag Vampire and hashtag Change the Ratio, which are two super awesome initiatives. Maybe she'll talk about them. And yeah, Ben, I love following him on Twitter to see what he when he talks about programming and reactive stuff. And I always have to I always learn a lot from what he's saying. So yeah, two awesome people. I'm really glad we have you here, and yeah, thanks for joining us. Again, really quick announcement. So we have partnerships with conferences all over Romania and Europe. First one I want to point out is RxJS in Timișoara. We have a discount code, 10% discount code. It's going to be super awesome. I'm probably gonna be there as well. I hope to see as many of you there as possible. They announced quite a few awesome speakers, and more to come, I'm sure. If you want to go Europe, .js, we also have a partnership with them. They offer us a 10% discount. I'll share the slides so you can have all these codes after the meetup. But .js is by one of my favorite events in Europe. Each year they have super awesome speakers like Brandon Ike and yeah, Sean Larkin, and a lot of interesting people to go and listen to. Yeah, NGD. Tracy was just telling me that she's going to keynote there, so you'll catch Tracy as well. Super awesome Angular event. And yeah, NG Rome, right? We all love Italy. Going there, it's actually October. The weather is going to be super nice. But also the lineup of speakers they have at NG Rome, like John Papa and all the others, are super awesome. I can't wait. It's a really awesome event. So yeah, these are conferences that we're partnering with, and we're super proud because of that. And yeah, enjoy the event. Thanks again to the speakers for joining us, and I'm gonna leave the floor to them. And I'm gonna stop sharing. There we go.
So I think probably one of the things that we should first do is just have Ben give a quick update on RxJS. And we really wanted to make this more of an AMA type session. So those of you in the audience, if you have any questions about RxJS, whether it be, silly little things that you're having issues with, like one of our clients was having issues with, it was really just share replay and just, using it properly. So, we're happy to answer those types of questions as well. But Ben, maybe you can give us a heads up on kind of like what's been happening.
All right. So one bit of news that some people know about is I have left Google. So that was last Friday, was my last day at Google. That doesn't really affect RxJS. If anything, it should help accelerate some of the work because I was really tied up with Angular work while I was there. And so that's one piece of news. It's not big news, but it's there, and people ask about it right now. The other thing is RxJS 7. So what is currently in the GitHub master is RxJS 7. And the work that's being done there is actually still being done in collaboration with Google. The idea is really just to update TypeScript and update TypeScript typing. So there won't be any functionality changes. The only possible functionality changes there might be would be we're experimenting with maybe changing how we export CJS or those sorts of things, but we might not even change that. That's kind of alpha and it's in the decision-making process. But the rest of it is just going to be upgrading to TypeScript 3, so we can get these newer TypeScript features and get better typings for RxJS, because typing functional libraries is really, really hard problem to solve. And it's been painful. Like RxJS started in TypeScript version 1.8, and 1.8 was really not able to type what we were doing with TypeScript. And there's been a lot of pain trying to move to new features so we can get things typing and inferring without people having to specify generic arguments and things like that. So that's what TypeScript 7 is going to be. And then ongoing, we're moving it towards a smaller and smaller version of RxJS, where there's a lot of deprecated APIs and us kind of moving things around. But that's going to happen slowly over the course of several major versions. And what the idea is we're going to try to have code modification tools ready to go, like a ESLint transformations ready to go at the moment that there's by the time you actually have a major version. So every minor version that comes out, there's probably going to be new ESLint type rules that we ship that you're able to run fix, and it'll automatically update and remove like your usages of some deprecated things that are still there, but it'll just automatically migrate you. And then by the time you get to the next major version, it should be a very smooth transition, because all of the tools are already there to kind of transform your code away from things we don't want you doing. So the idea is to kind of refine RxJS over time, over the next year and a half, and get it to be smaller and smaller and smaller. And when I say smaller, so there were 3 different prototypes written of various ways we could do this, and we did settle on one, but all of them, say you were to create, go to Angular CLI and create ng-new some app, all of them, they started off with 17K worth of RxJS built in from things in the router and forms and stuff like that. With the new updated versions of RxJS, it was down to 7K, so it's substantially smaller. And that's kind of what we're going for. But we need to get all the TypeScript typings right first, because that's been a big problem for folks. And we're trying to get that. So we have a lot of DTS-lint tests and things like that to make sure that the typings don't change on people, the typings don't break people. And we finally have the tools to get some of the typings right. So that's kind of what's on the roadmap right now.
I'm just going to go ahead and add to that and say that, as all of you are listening to this and in the room, if you have ever been interested in getting involved in open source, RxJS is a really great place to start. We absolutely welcome you in to come do things. If you look at the GitHub repo, you can see different. It's what is the label? It's like good first PR, right? I don't remember the exact label.
I think we have a help wanted label, but there's one like that. You can find it pretty quick.
Yeah, so different things like that. We're obviously always available via Twitter if you have any questions. And Ben and I were recently putting together a talk on RxJS operators, which is actually incredibly useful. And it was funny because as Ben and I were going through some of the doc explanations, we were thinking that some of them needed to be changed. So it's so easy, right, Ben?
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. So an open source contribution too, so there's different. If anyone here is interested in getting into open source, there's different kind of tiers of what goes on in open source. There's you can start your own open source project and people can contribute to it. that's really kind of a loose way to get started. You just kind of get used to Git and maybe get used to GitHub a little bit. That's fine. And then there's like you go up like one level, and then you've got things like RxJS. And I'm going to skip talking about that for a second and go up to like the next level, which is like React or Angular or something like that, trying to contribute to those libraries. So like Angular, for example, there's a lot more hoops to jump through in order to get a PR landed, because it needs to be reviewed. It needs to be run through Google 3. It needs to be, there's like a lot of formality around it, around like how the commit messages need to be, and how it needs to be reviewed, and by like how many people it needs to be reviewed by, and so on and so forth. RxJS is somewhere in the middle. So what it boils down to is RxJS gets used actually more than Angular across the ecosystem. So there's a lot of people relying on us, which means we have to be very careful about reviews and breaking changes. However, it's also not like a giant moving beast like a framework. It's a smaller library. So the changes are more straightforward, and the reviews therefore are more straightforward. So contributing to RxJS is quite a bit easier and quite a bit less formal than, say, like a React or an Angular. But yeah, it's a good place to start, and going and working on documentation particularly is important with these smaller libraries, because there's a situation when you get a smaller library like this, you can get too many cooks in the kitchen kind of thing, as opposed to like, say, a framework where there's just whole sections of code that nobody can even look at right at the time. Like Angular Forms is kind of not being looked at right now because everyone's working on Ivy, for example. There's no such thing as that in RxJS. It's tiny. So yeah. So if you run into something, or you have a PR that you particularly want reviewed, or it's been sitting there or anything like that, you can literally just directly message one of the core team members, and we'll look at it, myself included, on Twitter. The only thing I will tell anybody that's looking into getting into open source is, do not rely on messages or GitHub notifications to notify anybody. Because if anybody that works on a popular open source library in GitHub, my notifications are garbage. It's like a big pile of God knows what. Like I can't even keep up with it. So direct messages on Twitter are probably the better way to go.
Andre, I don't know if you want us to go through some operators, or if you want us to take questions.
So yeah, I don't have a clear idea about the format. Like, do we have like questions, or like Rx related questions? I think, is this working? No, it's probably not working. But shout as loud as you can, and I'll try to.
Okay. So I'm working in an Angular application with RxJS, and I'm finding schedulers quite obscure. So I would.
Okay, so it was a question about.
We can actually hear it, which is
okay. Awesome.
So schedulers being a little bit obscure.
Yeah.
So just like, you want a general explanation of schedulers, or?
What I can tell you, the use case I had to use schedulers actually. Timers are actually breaking the pattern because they get settled into NG zone. So in order to get out of NG zone, you have to do the cycle.
Can you repeat this, by the way?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
There we are.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Hello.
Yeah.
I'm Andre as well, so half of the Romanian population is Andre. So, so I had to use schedulers a few times, but once I really had to use it to get out of NG zone, because I was trying to create a protector test, and it was keeping NG zone busy due to a timeout. So I had to use a scheduler in order to get the timeout out of NG zone and then return when it was completed. And I found that quite not straightforward, and I had troubles understanding what I did. It was an answer from Stack Overflow, so I didn't really question. But I would like to know about that.
Okay. So schedulers are one of those things that the zones thing is kind of an edge case, but yeah, that's a place that sometimes people use schedulers. So what what schedulers boil down to is there's 4 different things that can happen that can be scheduled. One is subscription. So the moment you subscribe to it, it executes the body of the observable and sets up something producing data and starts pumping it through the observable or pumping it out of the observable. The other thing is the 3 different pumps that pump out of observable, which are the next handlers, the error handlers, and the completion handlers. And all of these things can be scheduled. And what scheduling is RxJS says, oh, you want to subscribe. For example, in the case of subscription, you say RxJS says, oh, you want to do one of these things like subscribe or next or error. I'm going to hold on to it and wait for the scheduler to tell me to go. So it's kind of a way of like delaying action for a bit. So for example, you're saying like, I want to call subscribe, and you use the async scheduler, it's going to wait for set timeout 0 basically, and then call subscribe. So like it's a methodology of deferring action until later. And there's a few reasons to do this. One reason to do it is what he was saying, where you've got some timing issue with something like zones or the like. That's one situation where you might use scheduling. The other situation where people might use scheduling is there's one in there called the queue scheduler. And the queue scheduler is essentially kind of the it's the computer science problem that sometimes people get asked in interview questions. You have some super deep call stack where you're going to get like, say you're doing recursion or something like that, and you can get stack overflows. One way to prevent yourself from overflowing a stack is to pump functions onto an array and then loop over the array and take them off and call them, right? So you kind of flatten out the stack. And that's what a queue scheduler is. So those are the 2 different methodologies or reasons that people kind of use scheduling, is to either eliminate some stack overflow from recursion or some weird timing issue. That said, that's kind of what schedulers do in a nutshell. They just hold on to a notification until they get notified to send it. There's also the test scheduler. So as a bit of a niceness to this design, since everything can go through a scheduler, you can run it through a test scheduler. And a test scheduler means like I can queue a whole bunch of stuff up in some internal array and then say flush, and it'll run through that internal array and make sure everything happens in the right order synchronously. There's a whole lot of nuance around that stuff. But the important thing is, I would give people advice about this is there's a brand new method called, or function called scheduled. It's basically just from what that. So the same as Rx's from method. It just takes a scheduler as a second argument. So we're trying to move people away from using from with a scheduler to just using scheduled, because it's the same exact thing. It's just we're trying to split the 2 up for size reasons. And then the other thing is I would tell people to try to stay with doing that. And then there's 2 operators, observe on and subscribe on. Observe on is probably the one you want. So observe on just says, oh, any notification that comes through this, I want to wait for the scheduler to tell me when it's okay to send it along. So what Andre was saying that he did to get around the zones issue, totally fine. Totally fine. I would avoid writing custom schedulers for now. There's not a lot of really compelling reasons to do so. I'm not saying don't. I mean, maybe you do have a compelling reason to do so, and please do. But if you do, and this goes to anybody listening to this, there is a chance that the API might change in a few major versions for us to try to get schedulers to be smaller in Rx. If that's the case, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to help you with refactoring your scheduler if I don't just do it myself or whatever. Because it's a really rare case that people should be writing their own schedulers. I've seen it. Usually it wasn't necessary, but it's out there. I hope that answers some questions about scheduling.
That was two thumbs up in the air. So, so any other questions you might have? You just have to come here and ask the question. It's like a question booth. You want to ask another? Yeah, another one.
No one else?
Yeah.
Okay with that?
So we have another one.
All right. So it's me again.
You know him.
Yeah.
Hey, Andre.
Hey.
Andre, the bold one. So
Maybe you should just get him as like an interviewer from now on for these things.
Yeah. So I rarely use subscribe in components, in Angular components, but sometimes I do that. And I also have to make sure they are unsubscribed just before destroying the component.
Yep.
And I use a micro library or something from GitHub. Actually, it's until destroy, and I have to provide this as the reference to the component.
Yeah.
And it has a minor drawback that I always have to make sure that I have ng destroy, which I might forget sometimes. I just wanted to ask you if you have any plans or if you have any other suggestion about dealing with this kind of use case when you want to destroy your subscriptions, other than creating subscription objects that you unsubscribe specifically at the end.
Yeah. Yes. All right. So I think that all right.
Is that clear?
There's a lot of different ways to do this.
And also, like, as an extension to the question, because it was really good. Like, maybe you can extend this to like common use cases of unsubscribing in observable in components in Angular, because I'm guessing that's something
Sure.
everybody gets right or wrong at some point.
Yeah. So I mean, the general, like the simplest overall thing that some people do is but it's a bit manual, is to say, oh, there's some property on my component that has a subscription, like a private subscription, and then I add all my subscriptions to it, and then I unsubscribe from it in my ng on destroy. Like that's kind of the basic version. Other things that I've seen people do is they have a subject that they next into in on destroy, and then they use take until with that subject. More recently, one of the more compelling things, and this is something I wish the Angular team would get to, but they can't until they're done with Ivy, is Sander Elias. I don't know how many people know him, but he's a brilliant guy. And he has this library of decorators that you can use to basically make a property that's an observable that will emit on certain lifecycle hooks, like on destroy. So that's another nice one. So you can just say, oh, here's this property that emits on destroy, and I'm going to use that with take until, and it solves your problem. Now, that said, people have asked me before which one's more efficient. The one with the subscription, the first one I said, is the most efficient. But does it matter? No, not really. It's one of those things where if something else is more ergonomic for you, or you can be more consistent with something else, that's probably a better win for you than worrying about like how many allocations of whatever you're getting for your subscriptions. So I would go with whatever way you find to be the most useful. The one with take until, honestly, it's a little bit more flexible at times depending on what you're doing. But at the same time, for some use cases, it might be a little overkill. So it's entirely up to you. The important thing is that you know that you're supposed to unsubscribe from your subscriptions, and you're kind of tracking those. The best thing you can do though is try to use methodologies that don't require you to manage subscriptions at all, like pipe async, or ngRx has like effects and things like that kind of subscribe for you, and you never see yourself write a subscription. If you find yourself in a situation where you can write your own helpers that kind of do that for you, that's better, because then you're in a situation where you never have to worry about managing your subscriptions as long as you're always using the same methodology, right? So you don't end up with memory leaks or weird things happening.
Yep. Any other questions? Oh, I know you have questions. Like, it's RxJS we're talking about. You probably have questions. There's another one.
Hello?
Are you Andre too?
No, I'm Mihai.
Well, you're gonna have to change your name to Andre, because I was promised that everyone.
His third name is Andre, probably.
Yeah, I guess. So I have a question about Angular and RxJS mainly. I would really like to have observable inputs in Angular, and I know that at some point there was a discussion about that, but I haven't seen much progress on that. So my question is there a plan to add support for observable inputs in Angular? And if not, is there a compelling reason not to do so?
There's no compelling reason not to do so. There are designs for it, but again, everything's held up on Ivy. So I expect that in about a month or two, you'll start to hear more motion. And actually, even some folks on the Angular team, I think, are really anxious to get started moving on some of the things we really want to do. Well, I'm not on the team anymore, but I kind of am. I don't know, family-ish, I guess. But there are things they want to do that, but again, that same library by Sander has some of these things built into it. So I would look into that. I think that those have, and he has it working for both Ivy and for View Engine, which is the older renderer the renderer that everybody's currently using. So I think it's a pretty compelling library. I think I would definitely dig into that. Honestly, like, and I'm not on the Angular team anymore, but if I were, or whenever I speak to them about this, I would advise them to try to stick to something similar to what Sander did. But it's pretty interesting. Like, you can say, oh, here's some input, and as I recall, I'm just going off vague recollection, but you can say, here's some input, and it's an observable input, and that means that every time it's updated, it's going to actually produce an observable. If you're going to try to do it manually, you'd probably want to use like either ng on changes or like do check. And if you do check, you just have to make sure that you have a distinct until change sort of operator in there to make sure that you weren't getting the same results over and over again. But the trick with that is you're going to get like everything. You're going to get like this feed of like, here's everything that's changed. The upside to that is it'll be happening at certain points in the life cycle, so you might not have to debounce it or anything as much. So it's yeah. Is it a good pattern? Yes, it's a perfectly fine pattern. No one's going to stop you from doing it on the Angular team or advise you against it. But there are libraries out there that I think do some of it for you, and I would try to lean towards that and lean towards contributing to those things. If you find issues or you have like a wish list or something like that, Sander's a really nice guy. So yeah, I think I'm just going to keep plugging Sander Elias this whole time.
He's a super awesome guy, and I know I've talked at some point at a conference. I can't remember which, but I know he had plans to do like these observable life cycles, and I told him like, yeah, do it. It's so awesome. It's gonna be so awesome. So yeah, I can't wait to see that actually. Is there a chance that we'll actually get in Angular at some point?
Yeah, because here's the thing. Like, so Ivy went through and it simplified the entire instruction set that's generated from generating processing templates. And in doing so, it refactored a lot of the lifecycle stuff and actually worked on some of that. And it's a lot more, how do I put this? It's a lot more extensible. Like, there's ways that you could add like a reactive feature to Ivy that wouldn't load unless you're actually using some of those features. And then that you would get these behaviors, and they would kind of like end up being baked into not necessarily your templates, but your components as imported features that would tree shake away if you weren't using them. But that's not available until Ivy's finalized, and Ivy's got a few months, I would say. Like, it's probably usable right now in the 80 to 90% use case. But the problem is, everybody's app, if large enough, will hit some of those other 20% use cases, right? And so they're trying to get past that. And the problem is, like, the current View engine, as we all know, has some quirks to it, and people start relying on those quirks. And the Angular team is desperately trying not to break anybody because they like backwards compatibility, like stability for everyone. So there's this kind of long tail of them trying to work around the weird intricacies of things people ended up depending on in the previous rendering engine. So once that's done, there's definitely a lot of reactive features coming down the pipe. I saw a design from Mishko about getting things like user events as observables instead of having to go through a subject. The nice thing there is they would be cold observables, so they wouldn't have to be already instantiated and running like a subject kind of is by the time you start nexting into it, that sort of thing. But yeah, there's definitely stuff coming down the pipe.
I was just getting a charger because I'm running out of running out of juice on my laptop. So yeah, any other questions? Other than that, I think everybody's super excited about Ivy, and I guess the Angular team is the most excited to see what people actually do with it.
Come on, Ben, give us an update on Ivy too.
Wait, I actually have someone here with another question. And then afterwards, yeah, another. Sorry about that. Yeah, an update on Ivy after that would be super awesome.
Yeah.
Right. I was about to ask exactly the same. I was about to ask exactly the same question about observable inputs, and there is actually a method that I use to solve that, because I very often need observables for that. I use getters. TypeScript setters for that.
Yeah, yeah.
I use the setter, and the setter populates a subject whenever it gets set. If you use a getter as well, you would be kind of forced to use a behavior subject rather than just a subject. And you might get into some troubles with nulls, because you have to initialize with something. But otherwise, you can use a subject and you can just set into the subject. And that's what I do.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So yeah, incidentally with that, I actually, that's kind of a good use case for a behavior subject. So subjects are probably fine. The one thing about Angular is the only time that you might end up running into a situation where you wanted that to be part of a behavior subject is, and I'm not totally sure about this, I'd have to go look at the actual Angular code, but there's situations where you have like a template. Let's say that in the interior of an ngIf, if your ngIf happens to be on a component with this setter design in it, and you've got a subject and not a behavior subject, there are situations where it might try to set that input property before it actually mounts the component, so your on init doesn't run or whatever, and you don't end up subscribing, so you won't get that initial value. It's possible. I don't know for a fact. Maybe it's not possible at all, but that's the only concern I would have, where a behavior subject would save you from that fate, because by the time that initial value is going to get dropped, because it's going to get set almost instantly anyways. So by the time it gets set, if it mounts later, it doesn't matter. So it should just work. Yeah, actually, the other thing is there's ways to, inside of Angular, manually take a template reference and like mount it and unmount it. And in those cases, you're going to want a behavior subject, because you could end up mounting something after you've set, in which case if it's a regular subject, the act of setting it is ethereal, and it won't store the previous state in there for the next time you subscribe. So the pattern that he's talking about is a perfectly fine, very, very good pattern. I would just use a behavior subject, I think, instead in that case.
I would unmute first. Taking a step back, I mean, we talked about super advanced stuff, but I want to ask a question on behalf of the people that are just starting with RxJS, and if you have some advice for them, I know from experience that it's a bumpy road, but filled with a lot of satisfaction most of the times. And if you have some advice for what's the path to take when learning? And Tracy has answers. Yeah.
Don't worry so much about all the different operators you can use. It's completely fine to just subscribe and do imperative code. Also, with RxJS, Ben and I just went through probably 20 different operators, right, Ben? And distilled down. And I'll actually share that really quickly so you all can have it. But it really kind of shows all the different operators that you should potentially be aware of, and the different, and you can kind of just ignore the rest. So don't stress out too much. I think just start doing it. You don't have to args all your code. You can really just do it in, one little area and continuously add to it. It's not going to freak you out. it shouldn't freak you out. Also, there's also this really useful thing on the RxJS docs. There's a choose your own operator adventure. So using that as well is really helpful when you're trying to figure out which actual operator to use. Let's see, another tip is a lot of people use subjects because they don't know what else to use, but subjects don't have a lot of the things that observables actually give you, like cleaning up, just doing memory management, right, Ben?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so maybe don't use subjects because we see a lot of beginners doing that and then running into issues because they're expecting it to act like an observable.
So you just did a talk at Angular Mix, right?
Yeah, and I just shared the document, actually. I don't know if I covered everything, Ben, but those are kind of like the things that I mostly think about.
Yeah, totally. So Tracy really is the expert on this stuff too. Like the just treating it like using it imperatively, totally fine. You want to remember to manage subscriptions, but usually just in the case where you've got like long-term streaming, if you only are getting like one value back and you forget to like say an HTTP request or something like that, you forget to unsubscribe, it's not the end of the world. What you have at that point is basically a promise, right? Like you can't unsubscribe or clean up what's happening with a promise. So it's not great, but it's not going to ruin your performance or anything either. So it's one of those things, and like Tracy said, like don't try to RX your entire app. I don't even do that. It's probably people get excited and then they RX the living crap out of everything, and then other people on their team get upset and that sort of thing. So we don't want that. Use it where it makes sense.
Yeah. I think a lot of people as well, like for example, when I pair with Jay Phelps, one of our other friends, I'm like, okay, let's RX all the things. And he's like, but then nobody will understand what your code is doing at all, right? So like, it's really important as you're adding in RxJS to your applications to do it slowly and then like roll it out to your team slowly, because you definitely don't want to be in a situation where you're the only one that understands anything that's going on, because that can also be very painful.
Right. And one of the things that can help with that, I did a talk actually at ngConf this year about building custom operators. And so one of the things that we can do in RxJS that you can't really do in other flavors of Rx is because we have these functional operators, you can create your own operators that are really just like, say you were filtering out odd numbers or something like that. You can create an operator that literally is just called filter odd, and then you return the filter operator inside of it. And then when people are reading through your Rx code, they'll see like, oh, I have this stream of whatever, and then I'm filtering the odd numbers, and then I'm sending an HTTP request or whatever. You just name, like you wrap the sections of operators that you're using in their own function and name them something appropriate. And it makes your code a lot easier to understand, a lot easier to test, because you can test the individual operators like in isolation and that sort of thing. So I recommend checking out that talk or trying to say, well, if like look at your Rx code and say, am I just using the operators straight, or can I wrap this in a function that better explains what I'm trying to do inside of this thing? And that'll help too. And it's kind of one of those things that even really advanced Rx users aren't doing right now, because it's fairly new with typable operators that you can even do that. But it's something I've been trying to recommend to more and more people to help them when they're writing their Rx code.
You're muted, by the way, Andre, if you're talking.
Let me rephrase. So also one of the things I've struggled with in the beginning, and I know like people who start working with RxJS struggle, is how are their observables, right? Like switch map and all the others. What are your tips on getting your head around it better, or better understand them? Because I know that they're like used in a lot of places, right? Like, okay, maybe everybody knows this switch map, but I know there's like a lot more to it than just switch map, right?
Right. I think whenever I was learning them, right, because I didn't create the library. This existed before I ever started working on it. What I did was I kind of played with them with making intervals is probably the easiest thing to do. Like you create an interval and then you map it to like a letter A or letter B or something like that. And then you can kind of like put them together and see what they do in individual cases. That's how I would go about learning what they do. Honestly, just playing with them by themselves in StackBlitz or JSBin or whatever it is you want to use. At like a lower level, I mean, people need to understand what an observable is, and really, it's just observables are just these functions that you pass some event handlers to in the shape of like a observer or whatever, or just even by themselves, but it gets wrapped as an observer and passed into this function that gets executed when you call subscribe. So there are functions that only get executed when you call subscribe, and they contain values. And so these flattening operators like switch map and concat and merge map, exhaust map, all of these things, what they do is you map a value into a new observable, and which is a function, and then it calls that function right afterwards and takes the values and tries to merge them out into the resulting observable. It's a bit mind-bending to try to explain to somebody. It's much better just to go try to play with it in a small, simple environment. I wouldn't even build like an Angular app. I'd just do something where you're writing the console with like, I've got an interval observable, and what happens to it if I subscribe now and then subscribe 5 seconds later? What happens if I take it and I switch map it into another interval observable, and so on and so forth, and just like see what it does. That's really the best way, is just to play with it. You can try to you can come up with 10 different explanations of the same thing, and it'll work for each one. Will work for like 12% of people or something like that, and maybe you got everybody covered. But at the end of the day, I think everyone would get it if they just sat down and played with it and tried to rationalize what it was doing by just seeing what it does.
Yeah, you mentioned playing around with StackBlitz. I think that's one of my favorite, and I totally recommend. Like whenever there's something I want to do with an observable stream, or I want to test something out, like StackBlitz is my first options. I go and I create an Rx project. It already has like the imports, and yeah, just play around with it. And I highly recommend it as a way of learning. So I also have another question for for Ben or for you, Tracy. Like, what's from your experience and from talking to people, what's the most underrated operator, like the hidden gem in the RxJS library, like something that the best kept secret, right? Or something like that, anyway. Or something that maybe people should use more because they're probably using like 3 operators instead of 1, or they're trying to do something way more complicated, and this operator helps them a lot, but they a lot of people don't use. That's a long question, but
Ben, which was my favorite operator a while ago?
Which one is your favorite? Oh boy.
Remember there was one that like I was totally, I can't remember which one it was though. It wasn't share replay. It had to do with HTTP requests. Maybe it was share replay.
Was it the recursive one?
I don't know.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite one that people don't know about is expand. But I don't remember. There was one you were very excited about, and I don't remember what it is now.
God. See, that's why there's too many operators to deal with.
Yeah, there is. There's way too many.
You should explain expand to everybody.
Okay, so expand it's one that I think is a hidden gem for people, because sometimes people find themselves in a situation where they want to say they want to load all the paginated data, and they go and they make an HTTP request, and when they get it back, it tells them, okay, here's some data, and the next page is here, and then you take that out of the data that you've gotten back, and you make another HTTP request, and it comes back and says, here's the data, and the next bit of data is here, and you kind of keep doing that until you don't get a link of next data. But in order to do that with Rx, people will frequently be like, okay, so I have a subject, and the subject map into the HTTP request, And then when I get it back, I'm going to tap and next back into the subject. And so they get this this recursive thing. And you can do that with just expand. And so what expand does is it's just like merge map. It's exactly like merge map, actually, with the difference of it will take the values that it gets out of the flattened observable and pump them back into the mapping function again and map to an observable and subscribe to it. So it's recursive. So you can use it to do things like crawl an async graph. It gets used in Netflix's Falcor, for example, to do that. Or you can use it to get paginated data and that sort of thing. So if you ever find yourself having to recursively use a subject and like a concat map over and over and over again to get the data that you want, you probably could just use expand, and it like takes your code down to almost nothing in order to do it. It's a lot more efficient.
I think for me, I guess I like scan. And the reason I like scan is because when I was first learning RxJS, I needed to learn Redux, and I mean, I needed to learn all the things. Ben showed me how to sort of replicate the Redux pattern, just like so. What scan does, what it does is it just applies and it returns each intermediate result. So you can use it for managing state in a stream. You don't need ngRx, for example. And that's like really powerful, right? Like, I don't know if you'd want to say, don't use ngRx ever, only use RxJS to do this, but it is something that you can do.
Yeah, scan is easily one of the most powerful operators. Like you could write a lot of the other operators based off of scan and merge map, like those two. You could write almost all the other operators, actually.
I think most of the bugs that we see when it comes to RxJS is just that it's like not understanding the operators, you know, not understanding like the teensy little thing that you thought the operator was going to do, but doesn't do. So a lot of times with debugging RxJS, it's just like, you know, making sure you're doing, like making, you know, like some operators, for example, don't work if you don't pass in an argument, for example. I think like retry, for example, that's like a good example, for example. But the talk that I pasted, like that slideshow that I pasted, that's something that Ben and I will probably get a lot of this information added to the documentation at some point in time soon, hopefully. But before then, you can kind of like scroll through that, and it's a really good way to like spend some time debugging.
Yeah, sometimes the hidden gems are like combinations of operators too. So retry is an interesting one with some of the take, like take until or take one, etc. I did this actual talk several times where I was talking about adding like a drag down to refresh kind of feature to an Angular app. And in that, like you end up composing this whole behavior with like, okay, so I'm listening for someone to touch and drag down. And once that happens and goes past a certain point, then I'm listening for this HTTP request. And I have an animation. And when that's done, it animates back. And then you want to kind of like reset everything. So you compose this entire behavior and you get to the point where that behavior is ended. And now you're like, well, now what? I want this to, I don't want this to go away if after I use it once. And the answer is just to be like, oh, I'll just add a retry on the end of it, or a repeat rather. So I was thinking repeat, I'm sorry, but like a take and then repeat, or a take until and then a repeat is, there's interesting kind of combinations like that you can do that end up being fun. Or another one is like buffer and debounce. So you can buffer and then debounce until the same exact observable if it's shared. And what that'll do is say, what am I trying to get at? Basically, you can do like a debounce time with that buffer, and basically it'll say, okay, well, I want to wait till 10 seconds after the last value I got in this buffer, the most recent buffer, and then like get the entire buffer out of the stream. So if you're like, oh, I'm getting a whole bunch of values and I want to batch them, you can do these interesting combinations with buffer and debounce. So it's pretty fun, but it's kind of those little combination things that I think, slip past people.
So I have because we're closing the time you had allocated. Like we would have you here for like as long as you want, but yeah, it's your call when you want to leave. I also have like another question related to. No, it's not necessarily. It's not exactly related to. I just had a question for both of you. If you have an example of an awesome use for observables, or like an application that uses observables or RxJS that does something like you wouldn't have thought using observables for, something artsy, and if you just want to talk about it, or you want to, the application and you want to share a screen or something, that would be cool. But I was just curious if you know about some cool apps that use RxJS.
Wasn't it Taro, and I can never say his last name, Taro Peruvian or something? I can't remember. I can never pronounce his last name. He had this really cool demo he did with, it was like music and like sounds and shapes and stuff that was all reactive programming that I thought was pretty cool. I mean, the use cases I think that are interesting are those things are amazing. A lot of the stuff that I see that I like though are things like what and like Falcor was doing with observables or something, where it's taking advantage of the fact that they can be synchronous or they can be asynchronous, and they're just kind of obscuring like what's happening to get data behind an observable or behind that implementation. But I don't know, Tracy, have you seen? I think you see more of these things than I do.
I mean, no, but I think the thing that I love about RxJS that I think a lot of people don't really mess around with is animations. Like I always love it when we pair on animation related stuff. So I mean, RxJS is mainly used for, normal stuff.
Yeah, so Matthias on the Angular team, he's the animations guru, and he has this whole library he had been working on, and it's, again, Ivy has that a little bit on hold, but he has this whole library he'd been working on around animations that actually was Angular agnostic, and it used observables to handle most of the animations in this kind of composable API. It was very, very interesting. I paired with him on it a little bit last year, and it should be coming down the pipe pretty soon too, I would imagine.
Is he using that in his personal website? Because I remember him demoing like a lot of Angular animations. I think it was his personal website that he was doing that.
It might be. I mean, it's a very, very much a passion project for him. So I would expect it to see the light of day the soonest possible moment that he gets an open chance to work on it, because it's really what he wants to do. But it's super cool.
And check out Matthias's personal website. I mean, that stuff is amazing. Like just the amount of stuff you can do with Angular animations with RxJS under the hood.
What was his website? Year of Moo or something, right? Or no? What was his website? Matthias's website?
Pretty sure it's hold on.
Yeah.
Let me look it up. I think it is, I think it is Year of Moo.
Yeah.
No, it's not Year of Moo. He has like another one that's super amazing.
Oh, okay.
I'll have to find it and send it to you all, but I'm sure if you like ask him on Twitter, he'll show you. But Year of Moo is really, really, really cute too. But it doesn't have like all the crazy Angular animations that he recently demoed at a meetup that we did. Yeah.
So, last chance for questions.
Something about the future of RxJS, what it's heading for,
Yeah, so some closing thoughts on RxJS and where it's heading. I mean, like I know you talked in the beginning about plans and the whole moving to TypeScript and better typing, but some maybe even further. Is there something even further than that on plan?
So the long-term plan is to refine the API and make it much smaller. As far as new features, I mean, I think everyone here can agree that there's more than enough features in RxJS already. It's just mostly going to be around refining the API in such a way that we're trying to make it so we can get it to be a lot smaller and get the typings to be a lot better. So it's going to be a lot of like developer ergonomics type stuff. Things that we're talking about is improvements to the test scheduler or changes to how we can do testing with marbles. There will be some new features, I think, that land in that kind of after some of this stuff gets underway. But the most important thing is trying to get us in a good spot as far as developer ergonomics. Now, I can tell you that these things have to, because of RxJS's popularity, now these things have to move a little bit slower than they would if this was just Ben's cool library, right? Like if it was just some library I worked on for fun, I could publish a new version and have breaking changes every week, and that would be great. But like right now, RxJS is used in YouTube, which is not an Angular app. It's used in PlayStation 4's main UI, which is not an Angular app. It's used in Netflix, which is not an Angular. Like so it's not just everyone's Angular apps that we have to worry about and migrating. And it's like this huge ecosystem. It was 10.5 million downloads last week. To put that in perspective, I think Angular Core had like 1.8 or something million downloads. So there's we have to be careful in how we do these things, and we're working with partners like Google and anybody else that's a big partner as far as like Angular, or I'm sorry, RxJS usage goes, trying to work with those people to make sure that our changes are incremental and easy to migrate through and easy easy on developers and improving the ergonomics as things go on. And then eventually, I think there will be a day where, and I've said this before and it's never become true, but there will be a day where, there's only so many ways you can write merge map, right? Like there'll be a day where it just kind of goes steady, and the things that'll change will be like, people will change how they're importing modules, or, the build processes will change, and, it won't be, everyone wants ESM or whatever, and we'll have to go through and kind of change how we're exporting things. But there's going to be a bit of flux while we try to migrate the API to make it smaller and improve typings, and then after that, we should see things kind of level off, and then there'll be some new features around testing and integrations with other testing frameworks, Jasmine and Mocha and that sort of thing. But then hopefully it kind of steadies out. We'll see.
You mentioned, Ben, about or hearing you say another question. I think it's interesting for people to know. There was a proposal at some point for observables in the browser. How's that going?
All right, I've heard this. Recently, I've been asked about this more often than not, and I think it has to do with the popularity of Rx. There's an emitters proposal right now that's basically subjects, only more complicated. So I don't know how well that's going to do. It's a fine proposal. I kind of wish that there would have been some cooperation on the observables proposal, because observables are more low level. One recent development that's interesting is with Fetch. So Fetch has this thing called a Abort controller that it ships with now, and it exists in all major browsers. And now it's looking like it's actually going to exist in Node. So if Abort controller exists in Node, there's not a lot of functional difference between an Abort controller and a subscription. So it might be there's a definite possibility that in the near future, RxJS might try to move towards shaping subscriptions like Abort controllers, and then eventually migrate to using Abort controllers for subscriptions instead, because they'll already be in the browser. We don't have to write them and ship them. It'll make the library smaller. It'll make the ecosystem more consistent. People will be able to use Abort controllers or Abort signals they already have with Rx and so on and so forth. So that's a possibility. Things that have come up, there's of course the observable proposal it's not dead, but it's on ice because nobody's championing it. I've been asked if I want to get involved in that. Maybe I will. We'll see. And then there's the there's the proposal that I had put forth in front of the WhatWig for observable as this part of event target. So that's a DOM API that has like, add event listener, remove event listener, and this would add a function called on that return an observable with the whole subscription thing. So it's possible, instead of subscriptions, I believe that we were returning a board controller with that, now that I think about it. But there are some possible changes in the future related to those things. The most realistic one coming down the pipe would be a move to use a board controller, which, funny enough, is not part of the JavaScript spec, but it's one of those things where, I'm sorry, TC39 members, it doesn't matter if it's already in both Node and every major browser. Doesn't need to be part of the JavaScript spec, it's just there. And that's true for like set timeout. I don't think it's technically part of the JavaScript spec. It's just it's a DOM API and it's a Node API. So it exists everywhere else. But yeah, so those are things around proposals and around RxJS's future with regards to the greater JavaScript ecosystem that you can keep an eye on. A board controller is probably the biggest.
So in closing, I want from you two to let us know, like, what are you excited for? I know the question is, what are you excited for 2019, but it's already like June. But like, what are you excited for in web right now? What do you think it's something that's gonna happen, that's gonna blow everyone away, or like, just some topic that you're super excited? For example, I'm super excited about all the talk around accessibility and performance that's been going on lately, and being brought to the foreground. So what are your picks for something that you're excited for?
I have to run because I'm 10 minutes late for a meeting, but or 7 minutes late. But I would say I'm excited about Svelte because yes, and you can look forward to me and Ben pairing on Svelte very soon together. But I'm gonna head off.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And yeah, everybody says hello or goodbye.
Twitter, Lady Lee, happy to chat anytime. We're hiring, and we're also available for any JavaScript consulting. Ben and I are both co-founders of the Svelte Labs, so if you need any help with like RxJS consulting or Angular consulting, we're super happy to help anytime.
Yeah, and I can highly recommend it.
Yes, of course. We love you, Andre. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Tracy.
Bye, Tracy. Oh boy, so exciting things coming down the pipe right now. I don't know, the top level async await is pretty good. I'm excited about that. Really though, right now, I think the things that are exciting is it seems like more and more of these core frameworks and major libraries are kind of converging on practices as far as modules go and build processes go, and they're converging on the desire to produce smaller and smaller apps. So it seems to be getting much, much easier for the average developer to go out and just start an app that ships with code splitting and tree shaking and all of these other things to help them build these rich web experiences without like destroying their users with massive like downloads. So I think to me, that's the most exciting stuff that's out there. And I don't keep my head on, I don't keep my eye on stuff that's going on with like CSS and that sort of stuff as much, but I know that there's some interesting things coming around the CSS space. But I mean, mostly to me, it's just the kind of the convergence of the ecosystems. Like not but 5 or 6 years ago, there was this thing where like there was Angular and or maybe like 7 years ago, there was Angular, and like really there was Angular and Ember and maybe a few other things. And the people were in these camps and they were kind of jerks to each other and all these other things. And I'm excited to see that that's not really the case anymore. Like people are there's a lot more cooperation over the last several years between these different groups. And I think that, as time goes on, we're going to see more and more of that. And hopefully we'll start to see like a change of the guard in terms of like who's running some of the groups like the TC39 and the WhatWig, like you see like kind of a cycling of different talent and different mindsets through those teams, and you'll start to see hopefully more of the stuff that we're all working with out here start to get reflected more in the changes being added to browsers and to JavaScript itself. So I don't know. It's just me. Like I don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of years, but that's kind of me being optimistic and hopeful about what's going on in the community. Things are getting smaller, things are getting faster, developer experience is getting better, and hopefully we start seeing more features landed in JavaScript proper and in the various platforms that we need. So.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for that optimistic last thoughts. If there are any other questions for Ben, like last chance, otherwise I'm gonna let you run because you already stayed like 10 minutes.
Anything like, I'm not working right now. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, so okay. Hang out with us. It's fine.
Right.
So any other RxJS and Angular? Because I remind you, Ben has been are you still a core member in Angular right now?
No. I mean, I'm not on the. I was a core team member as part of the Angular team. They haven't taken me off any of the Slack stuff, I guess. So, but yeah, I don't have all the same access I used to, and I don't really want to go through caretaker rotation again. So, caretaker rotation on the Angular team is where you go through and you're responsible for merging all the PRs and that sort of thing. Like, I don't want to do that right now. so yeah. But we have there's an ongoing close relationship with them because of the strong partnership with regards to RxJS. There's actually a team of maintainers there's a team at Google that's dedicated now to keeping RxJS in sync at Google because they have their own internal mono repository that they have a copy of every library that they use, including Rx. So I'm going to be working with them ongoing, and that's going to help keep RxJS stable. But other than that, like I'm not really on the Angular team anymore. There might be a PR for me in the future. You never know.
But yeah, we wish you a lot of luck, whatever path you chose.
Thanks.
So again, any other questions? Otherwise, I have to let Ben go. Yeah. So Ben, thanks a lot for joining us. Actually, I wanted to do this with Tracy as well. I think it's I'm gonna stop the broadcast now, and I'm gonna thank everyone for that's been listening. And I'm gonna post I already posted the live link, but I'm gonna post a video again so people can rewatch us talk about RxJS. And